He went down in the doorway of his own great hall, the strongest wolf alive, folding at the knees like something cut loose from its strings, and the only person in that room of 100 who moved toward him instead of away was me. I should not have. I had every reason in the world to keep walking. He had stood on that same dais 3 weeks before and given another woman the place his wolf had been screaming was mine, and I had smiled and thanked him, and meant it. But his wolf was already hauling him across the stone toward my feet, and the man was fighting it with the last of his strength, and somewhere close behind me, a voice I had trusted my whole life said, very softly, so only I could hear, "Let him fall." I knelt anyway. I put my hand flat against the cold line of his jaw. And I understood, far too late, exactly what I had been standing in the middle of. It started 3 weeks before any of that, on the morning of the choosing, with a man I had not yet learned to read, and a wolf I had not yet learned to fear. My name is Wren, and on that morning I was 24 years old, 2 years past the age the pack law calls a woman grown, and I had spent 6 of those years grinding willow bark in the still room of the iron fortress because it was the one room in that whole cold castle where nobody important ever came looking for me. That was the entire shape of my ambition. To be unlooked for. I had learned early that the lowest rung of a pack this size is the safest place to stand, and I had made myself very good at standing on it. So I want to be clear, before any of the rest of it, that I did not go to the choosing hoping to be chosen. I went because every soul in the fortress was required to go, down to the still room girl who smelled of camphor and crushed root, and because Asta of the Greywater pack had been brought across 2 territories in a fur-lined carriage to be presented, and the whole court wanted to watch the king finally do the thing kings are supposed to do. His name was Soren, King Soren of the Iron Territories. The wolf no challenger had survived in 11 years, and I had been close enough to him exactly twice in 6 years. Both times to hand a tray to someone who handed it to someone who handed it to him. The third time was the morning of the choosing, and it ruined my whole quiet life. I was at the back of the great hall where the low-ranked stand, near the cold end where the hearth warmth never reaches, and the herald had just spoken Asta's name, and her bloodline and the 3 generations of Greywater alphas behind her. She was beautiful in the way a drawn blade is beautiful, bright, deliberate, entirely aware of the room. She inclined her head to the dais. It was, by every law and custom I knew, finished before it began. And then the king's wolf turned its head and looked at me. Not at her. Through the whole length of that hall, over 100 ranked and titled wolves, to the cold end where the camphor girl stood, and it fixed on me with a stillness that made the back of my neck go cold. I told myself I had imagined it. People do not survive at the bottom of a pack by believing the king is looking at them. I looked at the floor. When I looked up, he had wrenched his attention back to Asta, and his jaw was set like a man holding a door shut against weather. That was the first time I saw the king of the Iron Territories fight his own body and lose by inches. I did not yet know that was the only fight he had been having for months. I should have left it there. I almost could have. Then his wolf did it again 3 days later, and there was no imagining it the second time, because the second time it brought me a stone. I found it on the still room sill at dawn, a single river stone, white and round and cold, set dead centre where I could not miss it, on a sill that latched from the inside on a door 3 corridors deep into a wing the king had no reason to walk. I did what any sensible person does with an inexplicable gift from above their station. I put it on the shelf, told no one, and decided it was a child's prank. The next dawn there was another. By the 4th I had 4 white stones in a row on my shelf and a problem I could not name. And I had started lying awake listening for the sound of something large and quiet in the corridor that did not belong there. The 5th one he brought in daylight. I was carrying a basin across the lower yard, and the great wolf came around the corner of the smithy, at a dead, unhurried walk, the size of a pony and the colour of wet iron, and the yard emptied around it like water around a stone. Warriors who could break a man's arm pressed their backs to the wall, and the king's wolf crossed the whole yard to me, sat down in front of me as a dog sits at a hearth, and dropped a white river stone into my basin, with a small, definite splash. Then it looked up at me, ears forward, plainly waiting to be told it had done well. I have replayed what I did next many times. I did not scream or run or bow. I looked down at this engine of death sitting in the mud being pleased with itself, and I heard myself say, before my sense could stop me, "You are going to get us both killed." The wolf's tongue lolled out. It was, unmistakably, delighted. That was when the king came around the smithy at a run, in his own skin, bareheaded, with the particular expression of a man who has been chasing his own wolf across a fortress and knows exactly how it looks. He stopped 10 feet off. The whole yard was watching their king stand in the mud, breathing hard, while his wolf sat at the feet of the stillroom girl and visibly refused, to come when called. "Apologies," he said. The word came out of him like it cost coin. "He has been. He is not himself." "He seems very much himself," I said. "He seems to know exactly what he wants." I should not have said it. I watched it land on him. For one moment, the king of the Iron Territories looked at me the way a man looks at the one window in a locked room, and then he shut it, hard, and whistled the wolf to heel, and the wolf went to him slow as a sulking child, and they were gone. I stood in the yard with a white stone in my wash basin and understood that my quiet life was over, and I had not agreed to a single part of it. If you are wondering at this point why I did not simply enjoy it, why a low-born woman would not be glad the king's own wolf had chosen her, then you have never lived at the bottom of anything. Being chosen by power when you have none is not a gift. It is a target painted on your back by a hand you cannot reach. I knew that the way I knew my own name. I had 3 weeks left to find out exactly how right I was. The choosing proper was set for the next full moon, and the fortress filled with Greywater banners, and Greywater warriors, and the particular tension of 2 packs deciding whether they were about to be one. Asta of Greywater walked the corridors like she already owned the stone. And the king's wolf kept coming to my door. It stopped being charming around the 7th stone, which it laid not on my sill but in the middle of the great hall, at supper in front of the assembled court and the Greywater delegation, by trotting the length of the high table and depositing it beside my serving tray where I stood pouring at the low end. 100 faces turned. Asta's father went the colour of a storm cloud, and King Soren, at the head of his own table, put his face in one hand for the space of a breath, the single most human thing I had ever seen him do, before he mastered it and lifted his head and pretended, with a straight face, that nothing had occurred. Nobody pretended with him. That is the thing about a court. It sees everything and forgives nothing. By the next morning, the whole fortress knew the king's wolf had laid claim to a stillroom girl in front of the men come to marry him to a lord's daughter, and the whispering followed me down every corridor like a draught I could not get warm out of. That was when Edric came to see me. Edric was the king's second, his sworn shield since before Soren was king, the man who stood at his right hand in every hall and rode at his flank in every war. I had known him by sight my whole life, and he had never once known me by mine. He came to the still room alone, which men of his rank do not do, and he was gentle, which frightened me more than if he had not been. "You're a sensible woman," he said, turning one of my white stones over in his fingers. "I've asked. Everyone says so. The healer's apprentice with the level head." He set the stone down. "So you'll understand me. The king is about to bind 2 packs and end a border feud that has cost us 400 wolves in 20 years. His wolf is unsettled. It happens to alphas under strain. It will pass, but it cannot be seen to claim a kitchen girl on the eve of his choosing, or men will say the king cannot govern his own beast, and men who say that begin to wonder what else he cannot govern." He smiled at me, kind as a knife. "Do you follow?" "I follow," I said. "Good." He laid a small purse on the table, heavy, soft. "There's a healer's post at Greywater. Good work, good pay, 2 territories from here. The carriage leaves at first light. Take the work, Wren. Be glad of it. Don't make me ask you twice, and don't make him choose." He left. I sat a long time with the purse I had not touched and understood 3 things at once: that I was being moved off a board like a piece, that the man moving me believed it was a kindness, and that I was, all the same, going to take the post. Because he was right about one thing. I was sensible, and the sensible thing, when power notices you, is to be gone before it decides what to do with you. I packed that night, and in the grey before dawn I went up to the great hall to do the one thing I would not skip, to thank the king and take my leave properly, in front of whatever court was awake, so that no one could ever say the stillroom girl had crept out a back door like a thief. I walked into the great hall at first light and found the king already on his dais, and Asta beside him, and the herald mid-sentence, and the herald was saying her name, and the words chosen mate, and I understood I had walked into the announcement a full moon early. He had moved the choosing up, to this morning, to get it done. So I stood at the cold end of the hall, in my travelling cloak, with a borrowed purse against my hip, and I listened to the King of the Iron Territories name Lady Asta of Greywater as his chosen mate before his court. And here is the part I have had to explain to a great many people since, including eventually him. I was not going to cry. I was not going to beg. I was not going to give that room the story it was leaning forward to watch, the kitchen girl breaking when the king chose a lord's daughter over a wolf's whim. I had spent 6 years being unlooked for, and I was not going to become a spectacle on my way out the door. So when the herald finished, and the silence stretched, and 100 faces slid sideways to find me at the cold end and see what I would do, I stepped forward into the space they had cleared, and I looked up at the king on his dais, and I smiled. "Congratulations, your grace," I said, and I meant every word of it. "May the bond be long and the border quiet. Greywater's lucky in you both." And I bowed, properly, fully, the way the lowest bows to the highest, without a tremor in it. And I turned, and I walked out of his great hall with my head up and my eyes dry, and I was 3 steps from the doors and almost free. That was apparently the wrong move. Behind me, the king's wolf lost its mind. I did not see it begin. I heard it, the chair of the high seat going over backward, the crack of it on stone, and then a sound I had never heard from any wolf, a raw climbing note that was not a howl and not a word and had grief loaded into the whole length of it. The hall erupted. I turned in the doorway and saw the king halfway out of his own skin, half shifted at the shoulders in the middle of his court, which is a thing that is not done, which is the mark of an alpha losing the inside fight, and his wolf was trying to come to me through the body of the man, and the man was on his knees holding it back by main force, and his face, I will not forget his face. He looked at me across that whole ruined hall like I was a door closing on the last warmth in the world, and he could not stop it, and he could not follow me through it. "Go," he said, to me, horse half-shifted, on his knees in front of his entire court. "Wren, go, now, please." So I went, because he had asked me to, and because the look on his face had told me, in a language I did not yet have the key to, that staying would cost him something I could not yet measure. I rode for Greywater at first light, exactly as Edric had arranged. I told myself it was over. If you have stayed with me this far, if you want to know why a king would shatter in his own hall over a woman he had just given away with his own mouth, and what I found at Greywater that turned me around on that road and brought me back to a fortress I had every reason to flee, then stay close now and follow this story to the end, because the next part is the part I did not understand until it was nearly too late, and I would not have you lose the thread. Greywater was where the whole thing turned over. I did not make it there. I made it as far as the way station at the territory line, a half day out, where the carriage stopped to change horses, and where Lady Asta of Greywater was waiting for me, alone, having ridden ahead through the night. I want you to understand what I expected. I expected the chosen mate to have come to finish what Edric started, to make sure the stillroom girl kept going and never came back. I had braced for it the whole grey morning. What I got instead was Asta of Greywater pouring me a cup of way-station wine with her own hands and saying, without any preamble at all, "He didn't choose me to spite you. He chose me because I'm the only person in 2 territories his enemy can't kill, and he needed the wolf's choice pointed somewhere safe. You were the choice, Wren. You've always been the choice. That's exactly the problem." I set the cup down. "Say that again." So she did, and she kept going, and by the bottom of that cup, I had the shape of the thing I had been standing inside of for 3 weeks without seeing one wall of it. There was a pact, old as the border feud, sworn in blood between the iron line and a thing in the eastern dark that the Greywater alphas had spent 3 generations keeping leashed. And the price of the leash, the term written into it 100 years before either of us was born, was that the Iron King's fated mate would die the night the bond was sealed. Not could, would. The old magic took her in payment for the peace, and it had taken 3 iron lunars already, and that was the real reason the Iron Territories had not had a queen in 3 generations, and the real reason its kings went cold and alone into the dark. Soren had known his wolf had chosen the night it first looked down a great hall and found a girl at the cold end who smelled of camphor. And he had done the only thing a man can do who loves something he has been told he will kill by loving it. He had named a decoy. He had put the word chosen mate on the one woman in 2 territories powerful enough to wear the target and walk it off. Asta, who had agreed to it, who was no one's victim, who had a bargain of her own with the Eastern Dark, and reasons I am not done being grateful for. He had pointed the curse at her and away from me. And then he had spent 3 weeks trying to get me physically out of his territory and his wolf's reach, before the wolf's blatant, hopeless, hammering devotion told the whole world where the king's real mate stood pouring wine at the low end of the table. "He's been refusing the bond to keep you alive," Asta said. "Do you know what that does to an alpha? Refusing a fated bond he's already accepted in his blood." She did not wait for me to answer. "It kills him, slowly, and then not slowly. He's been dying in front of his court for a month and calling it strain. Edric thinks he's protecting his king by getting rid of you. Edric is going to finish what the curse started, and he's going to do it tomorrow, because once you're gone, the king has nothing left to refuse the bond for. And a king with nothing left is a king who challenges the dark itself and loses." Somewhere on the road behind me, I had left a man on his knees in his own hall telling me to go because staying would cost him. I had thought he meant his pride. I stood up from the waystation table. Something in me that had spent 6 years learning to be unlooked for, to be sensible, to take the purse and the post in the quiet life, went quiet in a different way, went still and cold and certain, the way the air goes before lightning. "No," I said. It was the first time in my life I had said that word to power and meant to make it hold. "I'm going back." Asta looked at me for a long moment. Then she stood, and she handed me the reins of her own horse, which was fresh and faster than anything in that carriage yard. "I was hoping," she said, "you'd be sensible enough to be stupid about him. Ride." I rode back through the whole of that day and into the dark, and I did the arithmetic the entire way. Because the one thing I had that none of them did was 6 years of knowing exactly what the king's slow dying actually was. I had been treating it. That was the thing nobody knew. For 2 months, a sealed flask had come down to the stillroom every 3rd night by a page who would not say from whom, with a list of symptoms in a hand I now knew. And I had been mixing what eased them and sending it back up. Heart quiet, blood warmth. The things you give a body that is failing from the inside for reasons no herb can reach. I had been keeping the king of the Iron Territories alive for 2 months, and I had thought I was treating an old warrior with a bad chest. He had been writing to me for 2 months in the only language he would let himself use, and I had answered every letter without knowing it was one. I reached the fortress at the grey edge of the next dawn on a foundered horse, and I went in through the stillroom door that does not latch, and I climbed 3 corridors deep with my heart going like a hammer, and I came into the great hall to find it already full, because Edric had called the court to witness the king formally seal the Greywater bond at first light, the thing that would either save the territory or kill Asta, and either way put me forever out of reach. And the king was on the dais, grey as ash, upright by will alone, and the moment I came through the doors at the cold end of the hall, his head came up like he had heard his own name. His wolf knew me across the whole length of that room. It always had. What happened next happened fast, and I have had to assemble it since from my own memory and 100 others, because in the moment I saw only pieces. The king came down off the dais, not toward Asta, toward me, the length of the hall, past every ranked and titled wolf, and 3 strides into it his body gave out. The month of refusing caught him all at once, and he went down in the doorway of his own great hall, folding at the knees, and his wolf came up through him to drag what the man could no longer carry the last few feet across the stone to my feet. And Edric, at the king's right hand where he had always stood, drew his blade and stepped in behind his fallen king and said softly, so that only I, kneeling, could hear it, "Let him fall." He meant to take the king's life in the confusion and the curse's name, with the one witness who could undo his story already halfway out the eastern road. He had not counted on the road turning around. I knelt, and I put my hand flat against the cold line of Soren's jaw, and his eyes found mine, and there was nothing of the king left in them, only the man, and under the man the wolf, and all three of them were asking me the same single question. I had walked out of this hall once with my head up because I would not be a spectacle. I stayed in it now for exactly the same reason. Let them all watch. "I accept," I said, out loud, in front of the whole court, with Edric's blade a foot from his king's spine. "Whatever it costs, I accept the bond." I felt it take hold of me the way Asta said it would. Not warmth, not light, but cold, a flooding supernatural cold that drove up through the stone and into my knees and my wrists and the marrow of me, the eastern dark arriving to collect what it had been promised 3 generations running. It wanted a mate to pay the price. It found me kneeling there with my hand open to it, and my whole will set against it, like a shield over the man on the floor, and it tried to close my lungs and freeze my blood and take me the way it had taken 3 women before me. And I held. I do not entirely know how. I gripped the king's hand so hard the white river stone he had carried all this way, the one he had not laid on my sill, the one he had kept, bit into both our palms until it drew blood, mine and his mixed, and I think it was that, in the end, the blood and the stone and the choosing of it out loud, that the old magic had not bargained for. It had been promised a mate taken in payment. It had never once been offered a mate who walked back 2 territories and knelt down and paid willingly and would not break. A curse is a debt. It turns out a debt, fully and freely paid, is also a debt discharged. The cold went out of me all at once, like a door slamming somewhere far down in the dark, and the king drew a breath under my hand that was the first full breath I had heard him take in 2 months. Edric's blade was still up. I did not look at the curse cold leaving my hands. I looked up at the man I had known my whole life, the king's sworn shield, standing over his recovering king with steel drawn and his careful kindness finally gone off his face, and I said the only thing worth saying, quiet, into a hall gone so silent I did not need to raise my voice. "He's not going to fall, Edric," I said. "You should have made me take the carriage." He ran. He did not get far. A hall full of warriors who have just watched their king dragged back from the dark by a stillroom girl is not a hall a traitor walks out of. And what happened to him after is a matter of pack law and not my story to tell, except to say that he was stripped of his name and his rank and put out the eastern gate alone, which in the Iron Territories is its own kind of sentence. The king got his feet under him with my shoulder beneath his arm, the strongest wolf alive leaning on the smallest woman in his court, and neither of us cared in the least how it looked. He turned us both to face the hall. He was grey still and shaking, and he had just been hauled off the floor in front of every soul who feared him, and he stood there in the wreckage of his own dignity and did not reach for a single shred of it. "This is Ren," he said. His voice was wrecked, and it carried anyway. "My mate, chosen by my wolf before I had the courage to choose her with my own mouth. I gave her away in this hall to keep her alive, and she came back to keep me the same way." He looked down at me, and the look was the locked room window thrown fully open at last, and he did not shut it this time. "I am told I am not as cold as I think I am," he said, "only to me dry as old wine. I am beginning to believe it." He kissed me then, once, in front of the entire court, and I will not describe it except to say that something I had kept shut for 6 years to stay safe came open in me all at once, and I let it, and for the first time in my life I did not count the cost of being seen. The court did not cheer. It did something better. It knelt. The whole hall, rank by rank, down to the floor, the way a pack kneels to a lunar it has decided is real. The last to kneel, from the high end where she had been standing this whole time with her arms folded and a small wicked satisfaction on her face, was Asta of Greywater, who bent her proud neck to a stillroom girl, and as she came up, mouthed the word sensible at me like an accusation. I want to tell you it was all warmth after that, and most of it was. But the fallout was real, the way the prompt of every honest life is. A king who bends pack law in his own hall makes himself a question other alphas come to ask in person. We spent the better part of a year answering, sometimes with words and twice with blood, and the border with the East stayed a thing we slept lightly over. Power that bends does not bend for free. We paid it. We are still paying it. I have stopped minding. 3 months on, I want you to see one particular morning, because it is the one I would keep if I could keep only one. I was in the still room. I never did give it up. A lunar who cannot mix a fever draft is no use to anyone, and besides, it is the warmest room in the fortress and I had earned it. And the door that does not latch swung open the way it always does, and the king of the Iron Territories came in carrying a basin of water with both hands, like a man on an errand of great importance. His wolf came in behind him, and sat down at my hearth as it had decided. 3 months and a lifetime ago was its right. He set the basin on my table. And then, with the particular gravity of a man who has rehearsed a thing in private and is determined to do it correctly, King Soren reached into the basin and drew out a single white river stone, wet and round and cold, and he set it into my open palm with his own hand, and closed my fingers over it, and looked at me as if he had handed me his entire kingdom and considered it a fair trade. I let him do it for 2 months, he said. It seemed safer than doing it myself. A breath. The dry thing his mouth does now, that I am the only one who gets to see. It was not safer, it was only slower. I am done being slow. I looked at the stone in my hand, the 6th one or the 100th, I had stopped counting, and I thought about the girl who had spent 6 years learning to be unlooked-for, and how thoroughly she had failed at the one thing she was best at, and how glad I was. You know, I said, you could have just told me. I know. He had the grace to look caught. I am told I am not as cold as I think I am. You're not, I said. You never were. Your wolf knew it before either of us. It's the only one of the 3 of you that was ever any good at this. At my hearth, the wolf thumped its tail once against the warm stone, smug as a thing that has been right all along and intends never to let anyone forget it. A letter came that same week, from the Greywater post I never took, in a healer's careful hand, the woman who had filled the place that had been arranged for me, writing to thank the lunar of the Iron Territories for a flask of heart quiet she'd not known she would need. I keep it on the shelf with the stones. It is the closest thing I have to a record of the quiet life I did not get to live, and I find I do not miss that life at all. I had it so completely planned. I was going to be unlooked for. I was going to be sensible. I am still working out which of those I am gladder to have lost. So I'll leave you with the question I have never been able to settle, even now, even with him asleep down the corridor with his wolf across the foot of the bed where no king's wolf is supposed to lie. When he gave me away in that hall, when he stood on that dais and named another woman to send the dark off my scent, was he being noble, sparing me a death I never agreed to risk? Or was he being a coward about the one thing he was brave about everywhere else and dressing it up as protection? I have my answer. I am not sure it is the right one. Tell me yours. Tell me whether you'd have ridden back from that way station or kept going, because I still meet people who swear they'd have kept going, and I have never once believed a single one of them. And if you want to know what the Eastern Dark does next, now that it has been paid in full and cheated of its price for the first time in 100 years, because a debt discharged is not the same as an enemy gone, then comment the wolf, and stay close, and I will tell you what came to the gate the following winter, and what his wolf did the night it arrived. I was not going to cry, I was not going to beg, I just left, with my head up, the way I'd planned.